This is my second post here. This happened about 5 years ago. I was working at a translation company based here in Tegucigalpa, Honduras. It was a 7-story building. That day, I went for a lunch break and grabbed my phone. It was an old phone, no smartphone technology, just calls and text messages. I finished lunch and took the elevator to the 7th floor. Inside, I got a phone call, and I looked at the screen to see this weird phone number with like 20 or more digits. I decided to answer it. There was a lot of static and white noise on the line, but it was a woman, and I understood everything she said. So this is how the call went. And keep in mind, this was all in Spanish. Hello? Hello? Who's this? Isaac. Which is my name. Yes? Who's calling? Isaac. The angel is going to die. Who? Who's going to die? Isaac. The angel. She's going to die. The call ended here. There was a lot of static and it just dropped. It freaked me out a lot because my niece's nickname was Angelita, which means little angel. She was born with Down syndrome and a really bad heart condition that made life for her so hard during the 2 years she was with us. That day, she was scheduled for heart surgery at the main hospital here. We made a GoFundMe campaign for her and lots of people helped, specifically from the US. That night, she went to surgery and it was all okay. Doctors were taking care of her. The next day is when she had complications and was moved into the ICU. The whole family was at home when we got the terrible news that her heart had stopped and she had passed away. Our whole world crumbled, and I was struck with depression for about a year. To this day, I still have no idea who called me. A few years ago, I decided to stay up a little later than usual and watch YouTube. My mom was in her bedroom sleeping, while I was focused on a video. I saw my mom walk into the bathroom. I didn't think anything of it until I realized there was no light on in there. Hey, Mom, what are you doing? Then, I heard her voice from her room. I was sleeping. My heart immediately started racing. If my mother was still in her room, then who walked in the... I looked into the bathroom. No one. No sign of anyone ever going in there. The next day, while my mom was at work, I heard a really loud thump come from the other room. I went to investigate and saw a bottle of shampoo thrown into the hallway. My bathtub is completely perpendicular to the doorway, and the bottle couldn't have realistically just fallen. It looked like someone had smacked the bottle off of the tub. There have been minor incidents like this afterwards, but none that are as terrifying as this. Since being in quarantine was getting so boring, while talking to my cousins, I remembered a childhood incident, and another one back in 2016. And I thought I should share it here, as I still have no answers for them. First off, this incident took place like 10 or 12 years ago. Large gatherings and joint families were often the occasion in our house, as it was a very common thing in India at the time. It's still quite common, but not as much as before. All the elders, parents, uncles, aunts, were in my grandparents' room spending their own quality time, while all of us cousins, 12 of us to be exact, were playing hide and seek, which included my parents' room, me and my brother's room, my uncle's room, 2 storage rooms, 3 bathrooms, and 1 not very much used living room which barely gets any light, even in the daytime. Poor window installments. Also, this living room had a lot of antiques and old stuff that belonged to my grandpa, and was quite a reason to usually keep us kids out of there. It was our last round, and it was my brother's turn to find us all as we waited for lunch to get ready. While he was searching on the living room and storage room on the side of the house, we cousins did what we always used to do in the last round: sneakily get into the lunchroom and keep the seeker, wondering where all of us have hidden. As we sneaked back into the room, my brother still kept searching. Eventually, he came into the living room, opened the door for it, and tried to spot someone as he felt someone rushing there. As usual, it was all dark, and literally without turning on the lights, you can't spot anything. But my brother eventually caught attention of something in that dark room. He saw someone sitting beside the sofa as if trying to hide, with very shiny blue eyes. So shiny that it was the only thing visible in the room, along with the edge of the sofa. My brother couldn't figure out which one of the cousins it was, so he tried to approach the sofa as the switch for the light was there as well. That figure started approaching him as well, except it was creepy and my brother was a little scared of it. At that very moment, my mom called out for my brother, which caused him to look behind for a split second, and then he looked back toward the sofa and the figure was gone. My mom immediately came through, took him out of that room, and said to him, "We always told you never to go in that room, but you didn't listen. You might end up hurting yourself." That was very shady of my mom to mention something like that. And while growing up, we have always thought there was something that our parents never told us about that room, and never let us be in there alone at any time of day. Anyhow, my brother didn't share this blue-eyed figure thing with anyone until the next morning, when an explanation was needed for what had happened. After everyone left late that night, we all happily went to our rooms and had a good night's sleep. When my brother woke up in the morning, he saw all of his t-shirts were covered with blood. But he actually didn't suffer from any sort of nausea, he wasn't sick, and he didn't throw up or anything else. There were no other traces of blood on his entire body, no sign of any cuts of any sort, not even on me. Everyone was surprised and shocked at the same time, and my brother just didn't know what to say. After he discussed the blue-eyed figure incident and asked whether it was some haunting going on, which my parents denied by saying what they've always said, there's no such thing, the weird fact was seeing my mom say her prayers at that time after the incident, even though she only says them before going to bed. My brother developed a strange fear of sofas from this, especially when they were in a dark room. It took him years to overcome this fear, as even the medical checkups denied him having any issues with his body, and this all remains unexplained to this date. The second one is more concerned with me. It was March 3rd, 2017 when this first happened. I was in 10th grade, and we have here something called board examinations, which are the final exams after 10th and 12th grade. My boards were about to start in a week. The pressure was on, but I was someone who actually never got stressed in exam situations, so I was pretty chill and studying like my daily routine. On the night of March 3rd, I had a nightmare that I don't remember anymore in detail, but it was very unsettling and it woke me up around 2 a.m. I was a little scared, but was craving some good sleep, so I closed my eyes and tried to go back to sleep, but I couldn't. I started feeling like I was being watched while my brother was beside me sound asleep. I started seeing figures around the room's window, but then I thought that I was just overdoing it. Then I had another nightmare, and then around 3, I heard my brother say to me, "Are you okay?" And I said I was fine because the nightmares weren't much of a concern. But what he actually meant was I was shivering. I didn't realize I was shivering. Even though the cold winter days were well behind us, I was actually sweating. But still, my legs kept shivering and I kept cranking my teeth. I tried to stop, but I couldn't. I started getting frustrated and scared. What was more unsettling was the fact that my brother got scared, which is not something that's very common. He immediately called for my parents. They started rubbing my hands and feet, got me a cup of coffee, and put me back to sleep. I woke up at 7 in the morning, which was pretty strange, as I never naturally woke up until I've had 7 hours of sleep. I felt very refreshed and much better than the previous night. My mom came in and asked me how I was feeling, to which I replied great. But that was not the case. I was burning, and when she checked my temperature, I had 103 fever. and I was surprised as I didn't feel any of the symptoms. They eventually did kick in, and I went to a doctor's clinic and got some medicine. Whenever there is a change of weather, I very easily fall sick, like my immune system is weak in processing the outside weather changes, which was the assumption for this incident, and I never told anyone of feeling like I was being watched and stuff, because any such claim would just get rejected by my parents. By the afternoon, I started feeling better, but still preferred a day's bed rest in order for me to be healthy and resume my studies. By the evening, my temperature was back down to 98 degrees, which was a significant improvement, but then around the 8 p.m. mark, while just laying in bed, this time alone, I started shivering again, and then I also heard a thud on my window, just to find nothing there. The shivering again starts to get on my nerves, and I call for my mom, who notices a drastic jump in my temperature again, back to 102. After 2 days of medication and 2 days of the same shivering causing a sudden effect on my health, we went to the doctor again, who gave us a stronger dosage this time, and also wrote down some tests to get done at the hospital. He also mentioned that it may very well be exam stress, but I knew that was not the case. The third day goes all fine with a 98.4, but again, around 8 p.m., the same shivering starts as a follow-up to a thud on the other window. The same thing keeps happening for the next 4 days, around a week in total, where the shivering starts whenever I'm alone, around the 8 to 9 p.m. mark, and is initiated by a strange sound or sighting around me, like the thuds on the window and the ceiling, my closet opening up on its own, and my room's curtains moving on their own. More tests were consulted and more medication given. 15 different tests, all tested negative. No flu, no viral infections, no infections at all. After the 8-day mark, the strange happenings and shivering stopped after a long session of religious prayer earlier in that day. Of course, by none other than my mom, who didn't believe or accept any paranormal things, but still wanted to affirm my safety. I did my first 2 exams in a feverish condition, but eventually, after 2 more weeks of medication, I was back to normal health, with the only difference being a weak body that starts aching any time, and I can't bear much pain. Anyways, to date, no one has been able to determine the cause of this condition. I never shared the sounds or sighting things with anyone except my brother, and that too, months after the incident. But this is still one of the most baffling and unexplainable things that has ever happened to me. Hey y'all, so I want to start my story off with a bit of background information. I'm 22 years old. My dad is an essential worker who works around patients with COVID-19, and as a family we had decided that it would be best that he not return home for the time being, because my mom had gotten her hernia removed, which has made her immune system very weak, and so we didn't want to put her in any harm's way. My mom is bedridden, and she doesn't move around much. I had stayed up until around 3 a.m. rewatching Prison Break, and at this point, I'm very tired. This whole coronavirus quarantine thing got my schedule all types of messed up. So I decided it would be best if I sleep right away, so I can try to wake up a bit early tomorrow morning. I put my phone on charge, drink a bit of water, and lay down. I fell asleep instantly. I wake up, and I try to move my arms, but I'm not able to. I can sort of look around, but it doesn't feel like my eyes are moving. It's kind of like when you see something through your peripheral vision. Then I see the black figure to my left, which I've come to befriend from my 2 or 3 times seeing him and having sleep paralysis. I then close my eyes and exert all the energy I can into moving, and I wake up, sweating bullets. It was around 4:02 a.m., so I decided that I would just continue to watch a movie or something, so I didn't get much sleep that night. Fast forward to Wednesday night, my mom and I decided to watch an old Indian movie, so I went to lay down on my dad's side of the bed, and we started to watch the movie. An hour in, I hear the beep of the safe in my room open. The beep is pretty loud, so anybody could easily hear it. Nobody beside my mom and me were home, and even if someone was able to break in, There was no way they would be able to make it up to my room. You would have to go through the living room towards the hallway and go up the stairs to get into my room, so I would easily have seen someone walk past my parents' room or hear them. I started to panic because my dad's Glock 19 was in there and had some ammo tucked away by the side. It was an old-fashioned lock, so it wasn't hackable or anything like that. The only people that knew the code were my dad, my mom, and myself. Seconds later, we hear something drop to the floor. I run to close the room's door and open up the lock that was in my parents' room, which had a couple of guns inside. I load up and get to the move, carefully making my way into my room, trying not to make noise. My finger was on the trigger the whole time. My heart was beating super fast, and time had felt like it had stopped. Normally, it would take less than a minute to get to my room, but it took me at least 3 minutes to get to my room that night. I looked through every room before I got to mine. As soon as I approached, I heard footsteps inside. I point the gun up and slowly move toward the door so I can see inside. I take a couple of peeks and I don't see anything. I rush inside and look around, but see nobody. I stand toward the corner so I would be able to see everywhere, so no one is able to run up on me. After a minute or so, I look around and see that my dad's gun was on the floor and the bullets were scattered all around. I had some money in the safe, but all of it was in there. My mom immediately calls the police. If someone was in my room, there was no way they could have gotten out without using the door. There were no vents in my room, no windows, nothing. Scared, I go to my mom's room and she has this terrified look on her face. I ask her what's wrong, and she tells me the scariest thing I have ever heard in my life. She goes on to tell me that she saw me come into the room and stand towards the middle with an evil smile. She stared right up at me, and then she heard footsteps and hears me shouting that I was going to be right there. She wiped her tears and I entered the room and continued to ask her what's wrong. It's the next day, and my mom and I are still both scared witless. My mom and I had told the police everything when they arrived. They looked around and told us there were no signs of any break-ins of any sort. The lock in my room was a bit wonky, though. It refused to close after that. We decided to call my uncle and his son to come live with us because we were scared. They only lived 2 houses down, so it really wasn't much of a hassle. Can someone please explain to me what this was? Was it a demon or something that just really came to screw with us? We're really desperate for answers. Neither of us got any sleep last night. We're hoping that the thing comes back so we can try to get it on video. Any suggestions for where we can get help? So when I was around maybe 10 or 11, I lived in a rather small trailer with my mom, stepdad, and my older brother. My stepdad had a dog that he had tied up outside. The dog's name was Rocky. One night I was struggling to get to sleep, and I could hear a very persistent tapping on my window. I figured it was just Rocky when I realized that my bedroom was out of reach for him. Shortly after realizing that, I heard him barking farther away than where I was hearing the tapping that continued as he barked at it. I slowly and quietly got up and retrieved my stepdad to go outside and look for whatever he was barking at with me. My stepdad was tending to the dog while I was looking around with the flashlight. I had pointed it at our pool and saw an unusual figure standing on all fours with a very odd textured skin and eyes that looked like black holes looking back at me. Its head was one of the roundest heads I'd ever seen. I shared a good 10 seconds with whatever this was, just looking back at each other. I turned to get my stepdad's attention, but he wouldn't look. He was too invested in getting the dog to be quiet. When I looked back, it took off in another direction on all fours. I told my stepdad what I saw, but he didn't believe me. He told me to go to bed and stop telling lies. I didn't sleep for days. What follows is true. As a child, I lived for a time in a 100-year-old house in northwestern Virginia. that was surrounded by Civil War battlefields. When the states went to war in 1861 and the blood flowed, my town was the spot where much of that blood ran. And you could feel the psychic residue of all the bloodshed wherever you went. Our town had been a stomping grounds for the famous Confederate general named Mosby. The Union commanders he'd faced had given him the nickname the Gray Ghost, for his ability to strike at Union targets and then disappear, along with his men, back into the Virginia wilderness. A lot of men died around John Mosby, on both sides of the conflict, and the land was thick with their ghosts. You thought about them when you were digging in the yard and found a musket ball, the summer we dug up an old chunk of concrete we found beneath a hedgerow, and revealed a short tunnel full of ancient glass bottles, hazy with age. But it was worst in our basement. There was an unassuming wooden slat door in our kitchen that opened on 20 wooden stairs leading down into a stone-walled basement. And down in that basement, the dead almost sang. I was terrified of that basement. It felt older somehow than the rest of the house. Any request from my father to run down and grab something from that place felt like a death sentence. There was something down there, something hungry and fast. To stand in that basement was like standing next to a powerful, exposed electrical current. The skin on my arms and legs practically danced with it. Once I'd gotten whatever it was I'd gone down there for, I would climb back up the steps backwards. Yeah, sure, it took longer that way, but it was the only way I could keep an eye on all the dark corners and piles of junk where I knew it, whatever it was hiding and waiting for that right moment to pounce. The year I turned 10, my grandparents sold their house in New Orleans and moved to Virginia to be closer to my siblings and myself. And with both of my parents working long hours, we quickly fell into a routine where Nanny and Poppy would cook dinner for us 3 or 4 times a week. Their house was a little over a mile away, on a dark country road, and every night we would pile into the family car and drive on over for a home-cooked meal. One particular fall night, as the summer was just getting around to releasing its grip on the weather, my dad was running unusually late. By the time he got home from work, it was already full dark, and we were rushing to get into Nani's house on time. As we hurried to our beat-up old minivan, my mom suddenly realized that she'd forgotten something. Dad paused with his keys already in the car door. He might have rolled his eyes, too, but my mom waved him on. We were late. Go, she said. I'll be right behind you. Mom had her own car, a sporty red 2-seater. We piled into the minivan with all the chaos that comes with 3 young kids and a hurried dad trying to get us all buckled in and out of the driveway fast. As we backed out into the street, I glanced back at the house and saw my mom keying her way back into the house, her red jacket like a splash of blood under the porch light. We pulled away just as I saw the light coming from inside the entryway. She was inside. I was sure of it. A few minutes later, we were knocking on my grandparents' door, giving Nani a quick hug, and dashing for the couch and reruns of Taxi. Mom would be along soon, and then we would eat. Except she wasn't. And we didn't. 5 minutes became 10, 10 became 15, and half an hour later, my dad was concerned and growing more and more agitated. He tried to play it cool so that he wouldn't worry us, but after a call to the house went unanswered, he decided that somebody needed to do something. He looked at me. Come on, let's drive back home and see if we can find her. See if we can find her? Jesus. We drove the entire route so slowly that it was agonizing, but the roads were dark in that part of Virginia, and we had to carefully scan every inch of roadside for a disabled vehicle, or worse. Surely, if she wasn't at home, she must be at the side of the road with a flat tire or a busted radiator, but she wasn't. My dad must have wanted to race home at top speed, but to his credit, he kept the pace slow and steady. He didn't want to miss anything critical even more than he wanted to hurry. Eventually, after what seemed like hours searching the route, we made it home. And there it was, my mom's little 2-seater, still sitting in the driveway. It hadn't moved an inch. In fact, nothing at all had changed since we left. Except for one thing. All the lights in the house were off. What the... My dad had been about to ask when he opened his driver's side door and was interrupted by the rhythmic pounding and muffled sound of my mother screaming. We looked at each other, then sprinted for the door, my dad reaching into his pocket for his keys. They caught on his pants as he pulled them free and he fumbled them. I saw them for one brief moment spinning over and over, glinting in the moonlight, and then they were gone, down in the tall grass somewhere. We both dropped to our knees, fumbling around in the yard as somewhere my mom continued to scream and scream and scream. "Got him," he shouted, and we were up again, my dad stabbing at the front door lock with the big brass key and missing at least twice in the darkness. And then we were in. Dad slapped the twin light switches just inside the door, and the lights on the porch and entryway popped on, flooding the space with a comforting light. "Where are you?" he asked the empty house. "The basement," we heard her shout, and I shivered uncontrollably as we stumbled over each other racing into the kitchen. She wasn't crying when we got the door open, but it was a very near thing. She pushed past us and ran out onto the porch, and there she stood for some time, hands on her knees, breathing hard like she might throw up. Suddenly, she started making sharp, snorting noises. "My God, the smell," she said, and I saw she'd pulled a handkerchief from her pocket and was aggressively blowing her nose into it. "I can't get it out of my nose." "What smell?" Dad asked. "It smells like blood down there," she said through her handkerchief. There was fear and real disgust in her voice. When she could speak clearly again, she told us what happened. She'd gone back for a hat that had been hanging on a nail about halfway down the basement stairs. The minute her hand had closed in on it, the basement door had slammed shut. She tried the door only to find it locked, and then the lights had all gone out. She didn't know how long she'd been screaming. My dad must have seen the terror on my face because he tried hard to find a reasonable explanation. Must have been a draft," he said. But of course, that wasn't it at all, and all three of us knew it. Oh, I'm sure there are a million reasons why the lights might have gone out at that exact moment. A freak power outage maybe, or a couple blown fuses. Though if my dad ever checked for evidence of either, I'm not aware of it. I think he didn't check because it didn't matter. I've thought a lot about what my dad must have been thinking as we drove the route home without seeing her car. She said she was running in to grab something. She should have been right behind us. I wonder how scared he must have been. I've wondered if the relief he felt when he heard her voice, even though she was screaming, was the reason he never thought much about what really happened that night. Because there was nothing at all that could explain away the fact that the basement door had been locked, the lock on the basement door was outside of the door, the kitchen side, and the lock was a heavy bar lock that could only be engaged by a human hand first lifting it up, and then sliding it into the hole drilled in the jamb, and then rotating the bolt back down. I don't care how many times you tested that lock by slamming the door, it would never lock on its own. Not ever. It was simply impossible. Wait, did I actually say only a human hand could have locked that door? Well, my mother and my father and I all know different, even if we've never said so out loud. We slept at Nani and Poppy's house that night. I don't know what happened to my mom while she was on those stairs in the dark, and she never spoke of it. But she never went down into that basement again. Not ever. And whatever ghosts were or are down in that basement never bothered us again. Except in my dreams, and in the occasional acrid copper smell of blood on those basement steps. So that, my friends, was 6 paranormal stories. 6 true paranormal stories. Each and every single one of those was terrifying in their own right. If I had to say which one I thought was the most terrifying, the phone call from the afterlife one, the very first one, was pretty scary. The stepdad one was pretty scary, the one with the figure outside the window, just because that's kind of a fear of mine. And then the last one, Grey Ghost by Hewitt Theriot, which was actually submitted to me via my submission page down in the description. I'm going to link straight to the website for that as well, because they actually have a page of all their stories. That one was actually really terrifying too, because Whenever I was a kid, in the house we used to live in, we used to have a crawl space. We didn't have a basement. And we had to go down there for tornadoes, because I live in Kansas. And if anyone knows anything about Kansas, they know that, Wizard of Oz style things, we get hit by tornadoes and whisked away to wonderful, emerald cities all the time. That just happens. Joking aside, that does happen. Not the Emerald City thing, sorry. The tornado thing. And going down there, for me, for some stupid reason, was always terrifying. It was basically just a dugout hole under the house, under my bedroom, to be exact. It was just a dugout hole under the house, and it was just filled with dirt. And there were steps, and it was dirt and steps and a pile of dirt. And for some unknown to me reason, something about that room, that little crawl space, always scared the hell out of me. It was a really weird crawl space, too, because it was kind of like a storm shelter. It had like a full-on wooden door and steps. You didn't actually have to crawl to get in. Okay, story time, I guess. I'm going to waste the outro here. Whenever I was a kid, I had this really weird, vivid memory of having to go down there for a tornado warning one day. And I remember we had the weather radio down there that was battery-operated, and we had the light on because there was a light in the ceiling. And, like, the power in the house went out, so that light flickered, it went off, and it was just pitch black down there. And all we heard was this radio and the hard rain and hail outside, and it was just terrifying. Alright, I think I've talked your ear off in my outro here. Also, do you guys like the new intro to the video? I'm trying something new, and I think it works out for my channel. So, if you like it, let me know. Also, if you made it this far, this 2 minutes and some odd seconds into the video, the intro, outro, whatever it is, let me know. Down in the description, you'll find attributions for all these stories, as well as a link where you can submit your story to me if you have one you'd like me to read. You will also find a Linktree link down there, which has everything for me. From my channel, to my Twitter, to my Reddit, to my Ko-fi, to my Patreon, to my subreddit, to probably a few other things that I'm forgetting. Yeah. I don't really have much to say, to be honest with you, beyond all the crap that I've already said. This is going to be a long outro. I love y'all. I hope you're staying safe out there. I'll talk to you all later. See you on the next video, however you want to say it. But until then, just, yeah, sleep well. Just sleep well.